The phone was lying face up on the edge of the kitchen table, and Emily reached for it automatically, intending to slide it aside so she could wipe down the countertop. And before we continue, friends, write in the comments what city you're watching from and what you're doing right now. It's always interesting to see how far our stories travel. Brian was busy at the stove, stirring something in a large pot and quietly humming a tune from the 90s. "I'll surprise you tonight," he'd said that morning with a mysterious smile, and all day Emily had been trying to guess what it might be. Maybe theater tickets? Or maybe he'd booked a table at that Italian restaurant she'd been wanting to try for ages. The phone lit up with an incoming message, and Emily's eyes slipped over the screen without thinking. "Add the dose before serving. Don't mix it up." The sender was saved as just the letter K. Emily froze with the cleaning cloth in her hand. Brian kept stirring his concoction, not turning around. Her heart thudded loudly somewhere in her throat, then seemed to drop straight down into her stomach. She carefully put the phone back exactly where it had been and went on wiping the table, even though her hands were shaking slightly. "Add the dose before serving." The words kept looping in her head like a stuck record. Emily glanced at her husband out of the corner of her eye, his broad back in a plaid shirt, his light brown hair curling slightly at the nape of his neck, his familiar profile as he turned toward the spice rack. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of shared breakfasts, trips to the lake to visit his parents, Saturday movie nights. And now add the dose before serving. She took a deep breath and smiled when Brian turned around. "Smells good," she said, her voice barely trembling. "Oh, you haven't seen anything yet," he winked. "Just wait until tonight." Emily nodded and left the kitchen, feeling her heart pounding up near her temples. In the bathroom, she turned on the water and stared at her reflection in the mirror for a long time. 28 years old. Dark, shoulder-length hair. Gray eyes with slightly upturned corners her mom always said that came from her Irish great-grandmother. Her face looked paler than usual, but otherwise she was the same Emily she'd been an hour ago. Except now she knew something she hadn't known before. Or thought she hadn't known. They'd met on a train, in such a cliché way that Emily had been embarrassed to tell the story at first. She was heading to Philadelphia to visit her aunt for the weekend, reading a book, when he sat across from her and immediately asked what she was reading. Emily showed him the cover remark, "Three Comrades." Brian nodded and said he liked Remark too, especially Arch of Triumph. They started talking. He turned out to be an engineer at a small plant that manufactured parts for medical equipment. Nothing romantic, but stable. At the time, Emily was working as a nurse at a local clinic, and the idea of building a life with someone who didn't live at work and didn't come home after midnight seemed appealing. Then there was the wedding modest, about 30 people, in a cafe in downtown Jersey City. Her mom cried with happiness, her dad gave a long toast about how family was what mattered most, and Aunt Susan, her mom's sister, got drunk and sang "My Heart Will Go On" at karaoke. A perfectly normal American wedding, all in all. They spent their first year living with his parents in Paramus. Then Brian took out a mortgage, and they moved into a new apartment in Wayne. It was small, but it was theirs, with a view of a park and a playground. Emily had started thinking about kids back then, but Brian said they should at least pay off half the loan first. Reasonable enough. So that's how they lived. He left for work at 8, she left at 9. In the evenings they watched TV shows, on Saturdays they went to Target for groceries, on Sundays they sometimes went out somewhere, a park, a museum, a friend's place. Nothing special, but Emily was generally content. Or at least she thought she was. The problem started about a year ago, though Emily didn't realize they were problems at the time. Brian began staying late at work, coming home tired, spending a lot of time on his phone. At first, Emily didn't think much of it, maybe a tough project, deadlines. Then the business trip started. He used to travel maybe once every 6 months, but suddenly it was almost every month: Boston, Chicago, Denver. New clients, he explained. Emily believed him. Why wouldn't she? They were family. Then there were the little things. He put a password on his phone, something he'd never done before. He started buying new clothes, not expensive, just different, more fashionable. He went to the barber and came back with a new haircut that, honestly, didn't really suit him. Emily joked that it was a midlife crisis. He was 32, hardly midlife. Brian didn't laugh, just shrugged. That was the first time she really stopped and thought. The funny thing was, Emily wasn't truly afraid of cheating. I mean, of course she was, who isn't, but only in the background, not seriously. She didn't think Brian was that type. Not because he was especially loyal or principled, but because he was. Lazy, maybe. Comfortable. Life with her was easy. Why change anything, go looking for excitement, when home was warm, cozy, and there was dinner in the fridge? But cheating was one thing. This was something else entirely. Add the dose before serving. Emily left the bathroom and went into the bedroom. She sat down on the bed, hands folded on her knees like a well-behaved schoolgirl. Her thoughts scattered like frightened sparrows. Maybe she'd misunderstood. Maybe it was a joke. Or spices. Yes, spices. Some special seasoning that needed to be added at a certain moment. She clung to that idea like a drowning person to a straw. But the inner voice, the one that usually stayed quiet and only spoke at the most important moments, said softly and clearly, "Don't lie to yourself." You understood perfectly. Emily tried to remember who Kay could be. Which of Brian's acquaintances had a name starting with that letter? Kevin, a coworker. They weren't particularly close. Kenneth, his boss? A strange choice for a message like that. Christina? No, she didn't know any Christina. Maybe it was an initial? Nothing came to mind. That evening, Brian set the table in the living room. A white tablecloth, candles, a bottle of red wine. On the plates was something like chicken in a creamy mushroom sauce. It smelled genuinely good. Emily looked at it all and thought, so this is what it looks like. A Last Supper. A husband poisoner. She sat down at the table and smiled. It's beautiful, she said. Brian beamed. He looked happy, almost like he had on their wedding day. Strange, if you're about to poison your wife, would you really smile like that? Maybe he was a psychopath. Emily had heard psychopaths were very good at faking emotions. To us, Brian said, raising his glass. Emily lifted hers but didn't drink, just touched it to her lips. Brian took a sip, then another. She watched closely. He was drinking the same wine, eating the same food. If there was poison, he'd poison himself too. Unless Emily looked at her plate, unless the poison was only in her portion. She carefully poked at the chicken with her fork, tore off a small piece, smelled it. Nothing unusual. Just chicken. Cream, garlic, a bit of thyme. You're not eating, Brian noted. Savoring the moment, Emily replied and slowly put the piece into her mouth. Nothing. No strange taste. She swallowed and waited. Nothing. Brian smiled even wider. I really tried, he said. Dinner went on. Emily ate a little, drank even less, while her thoughts raced. Maybe it was delayed action? There were poisons that didn't work right away, hours later, or even days. She tried to remember what she knew about poisons from her medical training. Arsenic? It had a taste. Cyanide? Noticeable and fast-acting. Thallium? Tasteless, but symptoms didn't appear immediately. God, what was she even thinking? This was Brian. Her husband. The same Brian who was afraid of spiders and cried at melodramas, even though he pretended it was just a dust allergy. He suddenly said seriously, I need to tell you something. She froze with her fork in midair. This was it. He was about to confess. Say he loved someone else. That he wanted a divorce. That the insurance would pay out $20,000 if she died. Wait, what insurance? They didn't have life insurance. Or did they? Emily tried to remember, but nothing surfaced. Brian repeated, I want you to know you are the closest person in the world to me. I love you so much. She blinked. That wasn't what she'd expected. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I want to give you this. Emily opened the box. Inside was a ring, thin, gold, with a small diamond. Elegant, not flashy. Is this for our anniversary? She asked. Their anniversary was a month away. Just because, Brian said. I just wanted to make you happy. Emily stared at the ring and felt strange. On one hand, relief. No poison. No plot. Just a romantic dinner and a gift. On the other hand, something still didn't add up. Then what about that message? Add the dose before serving. And who was this mysterious K? She put the ring on, it fit perfectly, and smiled at her husband. Thank you. It's beautiful. Brian looked pleased, even a little embarrassed. Maybe it really was just spices. Emily decided to set her suspicions aside for now. After all, she could be wrong. People see what they're afraid of seeing. She'd read about confirmation bias, how people look for evidence to support their assumptions and ignore everything that contradicts them. Maybe that was exactly what was happening to her. They finished the wine, cleared the table, and watched a comedy on TV. Brian had his arm around her shoulders, she leaned against him, everything felt normal. Almost normal. That night, Emily couldn't fall asleep. She lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to Brian's steady breathing beside her. The phone. She needed to check his phone. She'd never done that before. She thought it was beneath her dignity, and she'd never had a reason. Now she did. She carefully got out of bed, trying not to wake him, and went into the kitchen. The phone was right where it had been, on the table, charging from the outlet. Emily picked it up. The screen lit up, asking for a password. 4 digits. She tried their wedding date, no. Brian's birthday, no. His mom's birthday? She couldn't remember it exactly. After the third failed attempt, the phone locked for a minute. Emily sighed. I'll find another way. In the morning at breakfast, she watched her husband. He drank coffee, scrolled through the news on his phone, occasionally snorting at something he read. He looked completely normal. No villainous expression, no suspicious glances. Just the usual, slightly sleepy Brian in a t-shirt and sweatpants. Are you leaving early today? Emily asked. As usual by 8. Why? Nothing, just asking. He left, kissing her on the cheek. Emily was alone and immediately started searching. She went through the apartment methodically, room by room. Closets, drawers, shelves. The pockets of his clothes. She looked under the mattress, behind books, checked the storage space. She was looking for something, though she didn't know exactly what. Suspicious substances? Notes? Proof? She found nothing. The apartment was clean in the sense that there was no evidence. Maybe she really had imagined everything. Emily arrived at work distracted. Her coworkers noticed and asked if she was okay. She waved it off, everything was fine, she just hadn't slept well. The chief physician, nor a woman in her 50s with short hair and a piercing gaze, stopped her in the hallway. Emily, what's going on with you? You look awful. Emily blushed. I'm fine, Nora. Just tired. The chief physician studied her for another second, then nodded and walked away. Emily let out a breath of relief. The day dragged on slowly. Appointments, injections, 4 drips, filling out charts. A routine that usually calmed her now felt irritating. Emily caught herself thinking about the same thing over and over again about that message. Add the dose before serving. Who could he have written that to? And what dose was he talking about? There were several possibilities, and all of them were bad. Either he was planning to poison her, but why? Or, and here Emily felt a chill run through her, he was using some kind of drugs and sharing them with someone. Or selling them. No, that was completely insane. Brian and drugs? He'd even quit smoking 2 years ago after his father died of lung cancer. He drank moderately, at most beer on Fridays, wine on holidays. What drugs? During her lunch break, Emily called Sarah, her best friend since high school. Sarah worked as an accountant at some firm, had been married 3 times, divorced 3 times, and was considered an expert on male betrayal. Are you out of your mind? Sarah said after hearing the story. A dose can mean anything. Spices, vinegar, lemon juice. You know how recipes are written. You're being paranoid. Emily sighed. Maybe I am. But it felt wrong. It felt wrong, Sarah snapped. Do you know how many times it felt like my husbands were poisoning me? Every damn time they cooked. Because they cook terribly. But no one poisoned anyone. I just marry guys with no hands. Emily laughed despite herself. Sarah knew how to cheer her up. Okay, maybe you're right. I just got scared. No kidding. But you checked he ate the same food, drank the same wine. What's the point of poisoning someone with what you're eating yourself? Where's the logic? There is logic, Emily agreed. Okay, let's forget it. I probably read too many crime novels. Exactly, Sarah said. Read something romantic instead. And stop spying on your husband. It never ends well. But Emily couldn't just forget it. Something inside wouldn't let go, a vague sense that something wasn't right. That evening she decided to be more subtle. When Brian came home from work, she greeted him with a smile, asked about his day, cooked dinner herself, mac and cheese, his favorite. At the table, she steered the conversation toward cooking. So, where did you get that recipe? Well, yesterday's chicken. It was really good. Brian shrugged. From the internet. Where else? There are tons of video recipes out there. And the sauce was kind of special, right? With a secret ingredient? She tried to sound playful, but everything inside her tensed. Brian looked at her strangely. A secret ingredient? No. Just regular cream, mushrooms, a little white wine. Nothing special. I thought maybe some rare spice, Emily pressed. You were messaging someone about a dose. She stopped, realizing she'd said too much. Brian put his fork down on the table. You read my messages. His voice was calm, but there was a chill in it. By accident, Emily said quickly. The phone was on the table, face up. A message came in. I saw it by accident. Brian was silent. Then he nodded. Okay. And what did you see? Something about a dose. Added before serving. Silence again. Emily waited, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like he must hear it. That, Brian ran a hand over his face, is not what you think. And what do I think? I don't know. Judging by your face, something bad. He stood up, walked over to the window, his back to her, looking out at the evening yard. I don't know how to tell you. She felt her hands go cold. This was it. Now he'd confess. That he'd been poisoning her slowly. Or that he had a mistress. Or that he was an addict. Or I wanted to propose to you, Brian said. Emily blinked. What? A proposal. A real one. With the ring I gave you yesterday. You know, we just signed papers at City Hall back then, no ceremony, no anything. I wanted to give you a proper proposal, like in the movies. A romantic dinner, candles, the whole thing. Emily sat there, not moving. And the message? Kate. My sister. She was helping me organize it. There was an idea to add something special to the dessert like rose water or something like that. But I ended up not having time to make the dessert at all, and, well. He turned toward her. His face looked upset, almost hurt. I wanted it to be a surprise. And you ruined it with your spying. Emily felt incredibly stupid. Kate, his younger sister. Of course. Kate was Kate. A 22-year-old culinary school student who was always experimenting with recipes and making the whole family taste her creations. A dose of rose water in a dessert. That sounded exactly like Kate. Brian, I'm so embarrassed, Emily said. He sighed. It's fine. Just don't read my messages anymore, okay? If you want to know something, ask me directly. Okay, she said quietly. He came over and hugged her. Emily pressed her face into his shirt, breathing in the familiar smell of his cologne, a bit of sweat, something else indistinct that was just him. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm an idiot. You're not an idiot. You just have too much imagination. He kissed the top of her head. Let's forget it, okay? Emily nodded. She almost believed him. Almost felt calm again. But somewhere deep inside, where intuition and fear live, a tiny splinter remained. Because the explanation was too smooth. Too convenient. And because Brian hadn't looked her in the eyes when he said it. A week passed. Life returned to its usual rhythm, or almost. Emily tried not to think about the message, but it didn't work very well. She watched her husband out of the corner of her eye, noting every little thing. How he lingered in the bathroom with his phone. How he flinched when it rang. How sometimes he looked at her strangely, as if evaluating her. Or was she imagining it? Sarah would say she was. Probably she was. On Saturday they went to his parents' place in the country. Or rather, now just to his mother's. His father had died 2 years earlier. Deborah, her mother-in-law, was loud, domineering, and absolutely convinced she was right about everything. Emily didn't like her, but tried not to show it. "Emily, you look kind of pale," Deborah said as soon as they walked in. "You're not sick, are you?" "No, everything's fine. Just a lot of work." "Work never leads to anything good," her mother-in-law declared flatly. "I worked my whole life, and what did I get? No health, no energy. Young people need to live, enjoy themselves, have kids." Emily clenched her teeth. The topic of children was painful. She and Brian had been trying for 1.5 years without success. The doctors just shrugged, both healthy, no issues, it just wasn't happening. "Mom, enough," Brian said. "Enough of what?" "I'm telling the truth. Look at the Johnsons, barely 30, and already 2 kids. And you two still nothing." The Johnsons were neighbors, and Deborah regularly held them up as an example. Lunch followed the usual pattern: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, fruit punch. Deborah talked about local news: who got married, who divorced, who died, whose house burned down. Emily listened with half an ear, nodding at the right moments. After lunch, Brian went to help his mother in the garden, and Emily stayed on the porch, saying she had a headache. Her head didn't actually hurt. She just wanted to be alone. She sat in a wicker chair, looking at the garden, the apple trees, pear trees, currant bushes, and thought about her life, her marriage, how things had turned out, and how they might have turned out differently. Kate arrived in the evening. She was bright, loud, always in motion, the complete opposite of her brother. "Emily." She hugged her tightly, smelling of some sweet perfume. "It's been forever." "Hi, Kate." Emily smiled despite herself. She liked Kate, no matter what. Or maybe because of it there was a sincerity about her that this family sorely lacked. "So, did Brian finally propose to you?" Kate winked. "Did it turn out nice?" Emily hesitated. "Well, yeah. More or less. More or less. He spent a whole week preparing. I found him this dessert recipe, absolute fire. With rose water and petals." "He didn't make the dessert," Emily said. Kate frowned. "How could he not? We talked everything through." She pulled out her phone and scrolled. "Look, see, I texted him, add the dose before serving, don't mix it up. About the rose water, you can't overdo it or it'll taste bitter." Emily nodded. "Yes, he showed me." She lied, but what did it matter? The dessert story checked out. And still, something felt off. Emily couldn't tell what exactly, but some detail didn't fit. That evening, as they were driving back from Paramus, she asked, "Brian, why didn't you make the dessert after all? Kate says you prepared for it for a long time." Brian frowned. "I just didn't have time." "But you were home all day." "I went to work, you stayed." What difference does it make?" "I didn't make it, so I didn't make it. I gave you the ring, cooked dinner, wasn't that enough?" Irritation crept into his voice. Emily fell silent. Yes, she was probably nitpicking. She probably just needed to calm down and stop looking for problems where there weren't any. But the problems found her on their own. 3 days later, Emily ran into Alex on the street by chance, Brian's former co-worker. Alex had worked with him at the same plant, they'd even been friends for a while, then Alex quit and disappeared. "Emily." He was genuinely happy to see her, like he'd run into a sister. "What a coincidence. How's Brian? How are you guys?" They stopped near the subway entrance, blocking passers-by. "Everything's fine," Emily said. "How about you?" "Pretty good. Got a new job. Pays better, and the boss isn't a tyrant." He smirked. "By the way, How's Brian doing with that project? Did it pay off? What project? Emily asked. Alex blinked in surprise. Well, that one. He invested in something. A startup or crypto, I don't remember exactly. Said he put a lot of money into it. Emily felt the ground shift beneath her feet. I don't know anything about that. Really? Weird. Well, maybe it didn't work out and he didn't want to upset you. Guys like to hide their failures. Alex clapped her on the shoulder. Anyway, I've got to run. Say hi to him for me. She stood there for another minute, trying to process what she'd just heard. Investments. A lot of money. Brian had never said a word. They planned their budget together, saved together for vacations, renovations, the future. Where did he get money to invest? And where did it go? She walked home like in a dream. Her thoughts jumped from one thing to another. The investments failed. Brian lost money. Maybe a lot of money. Maybe their money the savings for a bigger down payment on a larger place. But what did that have to do with the message? Emily stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. What if? What if Brian was in debt? What if he owed someone who wouldn't be polite about it? What if that K wasn't Kate, but a creditor? What if the dose wasn't rose water at all, but something else entirely? She pulled out her phone and called Sarah. Sarah, I need your help. Now. They met at a cafe downtown. Sarah listened in silence, which was completely out of character for her. When Emily finished, Sarah was quiet for another minute, then said, Okay. Here's what you do. You need to check your accounts. How? You have a joint account, right? Where your salaries go. Yes, but I haven't used it in a while. I pay for everything with my card. And that's a mistake. Log into online banking, look at the transaction history. And also check your credit report. Just in case maybe he took something out in your name. Emily felt cold. You think he could? I'm not thinking anything. I'm cautious. Check, and you'll either calm down or you won't, but at least you'll know. That evening, while Brian was watching football, Emily locked herself in the bedroom with her laptop. She logged into online banking. The joint account looked normal: salary deposits, utility payments, nothing suspicious. Then she checked her credit report through one of the free services. Clean. No loans in her name except the mortgage they'd taken out together. She was already ready to breathe a sigh of relief when she suddenly remembered Brian had another account. A personal one, where his bonuses were deposited. He'd mentioned it once, a long time ago, during their first year of marriage. Emily tried to log in, but she didn't know the username or the password. She sat there staring at the screen, thinking. She could ask him directly. But if he was hiding something, he wouldn't tell her. Or he'd lie. Like with that dessert story. The next day, Emily called the bank. She introduced herself as his wife and said she'd lost access to their family account. The bank representative was polite but firm. Without the account holder present and proper document verification, they couldn't provide any information. Emily thanked her and hung up. A dead end. She sat at work, mechanically doing her job, while her mind was elsewhere. She needed a different approach. Maybe talk to one of his friends? But who? Brian wasn't particularly close with coworkers, and his old friends were scattered across different cities. That left family. Deborah definitely didn't know anything. Brian wasn't the type to share financial problems with his mother. Kate? Too young. He wouldn't confide in her either. And then Emily remembered Uncle Howard. Howard was the older brother of her late father-in-law. A former military man, then a businessman, now retired. He lived in Suffolk County, on a large piece of land, kept bees. Emily had only seen him a few times at her father-in-law's funeral and at some family anniversary, but she knew Brian stayed in touch with him and visited occasionally. And she also knew Uncle Howard had money. A lot of money. What if Brian had borrowed from him? She didn't have Howard's phone number, but she did have his address, written somewhere in an old planner, just in case she ever needed to send a Christmas card. Emily found the planner on the top shelf, turned it over in her hands, and made a decision. On Saturday, she lied to Brian, saying she was going to a school friend's birthday, and instead got in the car and drove to Long Island. She found Uncle Howard's house by the description: a tall dark wooden fence, and above it, a roof with a rooster-shaped weather vane. The gate was open. Emily walked onto the property and saw an elderly man sitting on the porch of a large wooden house. He was cleaning mushrooms, placing the peeled ones into an enamel basin. "Hello, Howard," Emily said. "I'm Emily, Brian's wife." The old man looked up. His eyes were the same light gray as Brian's, apparently a family trait. "I know who you are," he said calmly. "Sit down. Want some tea?" The tea was strong, with honey from his own hives. Howard turned out to be quiet but kind. He asked about her job, her life, her health. Emily answered automatically, trying to figure out how to steer the conversation where she needed it to go. Finally, she gathered the courage. "Howard, I wanted to ask. Did Brian come to you? I mean, about money?" The old man set his cup aside. "He did." A pause. Emily waited. "About a year ago," Uncle Howard continued. "Asked to borrow a serious amount. For some project. And you gave it to him?" "I did. He's my nephew. I've watched out for him since he was a kid. When Thomas's father got sick, I promised I wouldn't abandon him." "And did he pay you back?" "No." Another pause. "He says the project failed. The money's gone. Promises he'll pay me back when he can." Emily closed her eyes. "How much?" $50,000. She nearly stopped breathing. $50,000. That was a huge amount for them, almost equal to all their joint savings for a bigger apartment. "He didn't tell you," she said. "It wasn't a question." "No." Howard nodded. "I figured as much. Brian's always been secretive. Even as a kid he'd mess something up, then sit there silent like a partisan." Emily drove back in complete numbness. $50,000. Brian had borrowed $50,000 from his uncle and lost it on some project. And he hadn't told her a thing. How much else did he owe? And to whom? Her thoughts returned to that message. "Kay is Kate," he said. But what if it wasn't? What if Kay was a creditor? A collector? Someone criminal? What if Brian was in a hole he couldn't crawl out of the honest way? She pulled out her phone and Googled, "husband poisoning wife insurance." Several news articles popped up, cases where husbands poisoned their wives for insurance payouts. Or wives poisoned husbands. Apparently, it wasn't as rare as she thought. Emily felt nauseous. No. This was madness. Brian wasn't a killer. He was an ordinary man who'd made a stupid mistake, invested money in the wrong place, lost it. That didn't mean she was greeted at home by the smell of fried potatoes. Brian was standing at the stove, humming to himself. "Oh, hey. How was the birthday?" "Fine," Emily said. Her voice sounded flat, but Brian didn't seem to notice. "Sit down, dinner's almost ready." She sat at the table and watched him put food on the plates. Her husband. 5 years together. She thought she knew him. It turned out she didn't know him at all. That night, Emily didn't sleep again. She lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to Brian's breathing. She had to make a decision. Either she asked him directly about the money, the debts, everything. Or she kept digging on her own. Or she pretended she knew nothing and went on living as before. The third option was the easiest and the most cowardly. Emily got up, went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water. Outside the window, the lights in the neighboring building were on. Someone else was awake at this late hour too. She thought about her life. About what it could have been and what it had become. About the choices she'd made, right and wrong. About love that may have turned into habit a long time ago. When had she fallen in love with Brian? Had she loved him at all? Or was she just afraid of being alone, craving stability, a normal life, a husband, a home, children? Children who never came. In the morning, she called in sick. Said she wasn't feeling well. Then she waited for Brian to leave and sat down at the computer. She needed information. She started with social media, went through his profiles on every platform she knew. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Nothing unusual. Photos from the country house, news reposts, occasional comments on friends' posts. Then she dug deeper. She found an investment forum where a username similar to his popped up: Brian W88. Welch, his last name, and 88, his birth year. It matched. On the forum, that username asked questions about cryptocurrency, tokens, promising projects. The last post was about a year ago, right around the time Uncle Howard said Brian had borrowed the money. Emily found more traces. A crypto Telegram channel where he was listed as a member. She recognized his avatar. A Reddit thread discussing a failed project, an NFT collection with cat pictures. Judging by the comments, it had been a scam, and many people had lost money. Emily wasn't a crypto expert, but she got the general picture. Brian had invested in something shady and gone bust. A typical story from 2021 to 2022, when everyone was losing their minds over Bitcoin and NFTs. Now she needed to understand the scale. $50,000 was just Uncle Howard. What if there were other creditors? She remembered Alex and his words: he invested big money. Maybe he knew more. Emily found Alex on social media and messaged him. The reply came an hour later: "Hey. Yeah, Brian got really into it back then. Don't know the exact amount, but he bragged about pulling together around 70 grand from different sources. Part of it was a personal loan. Asked me if I wanted in too. I said no, thank God." "He didn't tell you?" Emily replied, "No." Then added, "Please don't tell him I asked." Alex sent a thumbs up emoji. $70,000. A personal loan. That was worse than she thought. If it was a loan, there were monthly payments. If there were payments, he needed money. And if there wasn't enough money? She opened a calculator and tried to estimate. With a loan of $20,000 at an interest rate of 15 to 20%, the monthly payment would be around $400. Brian made about $2,800 a month. Minus the mortgage another $1,000. Minus utilities, food, transportation. That left maybe $300 to $500. If he was carrying a loan, that explained why they'd barely been saving in recent months, why he'd stopped buying her flowers just because, why they hadn't taken a single trip abroad, even though they used to plan it. That evening, Brian came home in a good mood. Said he'd been praised at work for a project and promised a bonus. Emily listened and nodded, while everything inside her tightened. A bonus. Interesting. Where would that go? Toward paying off debt? Or into new investments? Over dinner, she asked casually, "Brian, we haven't checked our savings in a while. Maybe we should look at them together?" He froze with his fork in his hand. "Why?" "Well, just because. I want to see how much we have. Maybe enough for a vacation." "Enough," he said shortly. And changed the subject. Emily understood he wasn't going to show her. Which meant there was something to hide. She decided to act differently. On Saturday, when Brian went to his mother's place to fix some fence, Emily called the bank, the one where they had their mortgage. She introduced herself and asked for a statement on the loan account. The operator was friendly. "Yes, everything's fine. Payments are on time, no outstanding balance." "And there are no other loans in our names?" Emily asked. "Not in your name. In your husband's." A pause. "I'll need a power of attorney to provide that information." "I see. Thank you." So there was something. Otherwise, they would have said no right away. On Monday, Emily took another day off. She went to the bank in person, the same one where they'd taken out the mortgage. She said she was interested in applying for a new loan, and during the process, she learned something interesting. Yes, a personal loan for $20,000 had been issued in the name of Brian Welch in July of the previous year. The bank employee, a young woman with fake eyelashes, let it slip accidentally, then caught herself. "Oh, I shouldn't have said that, it's confidential." Emily reassured her. "It's okay. We're husband and wife. We don't have secrets." The woman nodded with relief. $20,000. Plus 50 from Uncle Howard. Total 70. Alex hadn't lied. Emily walked out of the bank and stood on the sidewalk for a long time, staring at the stream of cars. $70,000 in debt. And a husband who was hiding it all. Why? Shame? Fear of her reaction? Or was he planning some kind of way out? She remembered the message add the dose before serving, and for the first time, she felt truly afraid. That evening, she called her mother. Just to talk, to hear a familiar voice. Her mother lived in Scranton, alone. Emily's father had died 5 years earlier, shortly after her wedding. What's wrong? Her mother asked right away. You sound strange. Everything's fine, Mom. I'm just tired. Tired, she says. You always say that when something's wrong. Talk to me. Emily wanted to tell her, but she couldn't. Her mother worried enough as it was high blood pressure, heart issues. Mom, really, everything's fine. Just a lot of work, the bosses are nitpicking, and I'm thinking too much. Thinking about what exactly? The future. Kids. You know we're trying. I know. So what? They'll come. You're beautiful, still young. And your Brian is a good, serious guy. Emily pressed her lips together. A good guy. Serious. If only her mother knew. Call more often, okay? Emily hung up and burst into tears. For the first time in days, real tears, sobbing like a child. She cried for a long time, until there were no tears left. Then she washed her face and looked at herself in the mirror. Red eyes. A swollen nose. Beautiful, right? She remembered herself 5 years earlier, a young, happy bride who believed in love and a shared future. Where had that girl gone? When had she turned into this exhausted woman with an anxious look in her eyes? Brian came home late, after 10. He said he'd stayed late at work. He smelled of alcohol, not strongly, but noticeably. Drinks with coworkers? Emily asked. Yeah, a little. We were celebrating after the project. He went to bed almost immediately, and she stayed sitting in the kitchen. Thinking. Weighing things. Making a decision. By morning, it had formed. She would go see Kate. Talk to her honestly. Ask whether she really had written about rose water, or whether her brother had asked her to play along. Kate was a terrible liar. Emily remembered that. If she was lying, it would show. Kate lived in a culinary college dorm in Hoboken. Emily went there Wednesday afternoon, when she was sure Brian was at work. She found the right room and knocked. A roommate opened the door, a chubby girl in a tracksuit. Kate? She's at her internship, at a restaurant. She'll be back in the evening. Emily left a note. Call me. It's important. Emily. And her phone number. Kate called that same evening. Emily? What's going on? Why did you come by? Kate, I need to talk to you. In person. Can you meet tomorrow? I can. But why so urgent? I'll tell you tomorrow. They met at a cafe by the subway, small, cozy, smelling of cinnamon and fresh pastries. Kate looked worried. Emily, spill it. What's happening? Did you and Brian have a fight? Not exactly. Emily paused, choosing her words. Kate, be honest with me. Was it you who texted him about the dose? About rose water? Kate frowned. Yeah, it was me. Why? Show me the messages. Why? Please, show me. Kate pulled out her phone and scrolled. Here. Look. Emily took the phone. The messages were there. A discussion of the recipe, ingredient choices, advice about the rose water dosage. The date was the day before that ill-fated dinner. Everything lined up. Satisfied? Kate asked, slightly annoyed. Emily nodded. I'm sorry. I guess I'm just paranoid. Not guess, definitely. Listen, what's going on with you two anyway? Brian's been kind of on edge lately. You too. Something wrong? Emily thought for a moment. Kate was Brian's younger sister, but she was an adult. 22. And most importantly, she wasn't the type to run off and repeat everything. Kate, do you know anything about Brian's debts? Kate froze. Debts? He borrowed money. From Uncle Howard. From a bank. A lot of money. Did you know? Kate lowered her eyes. I heard something. Mom was talking to Uncle Howard on the phone. Something came up. But I didn't really dig into it. He didn't tell you anything? No. We're not that close, honestly. He's my older brother, always kind of distant. Emily nodded. That sounded like Brian. Keeping everything inside, showing no weakness, not asking for help even when drowning. On the way home, Emily thought about what she'd learned. The message about the dose really was from Kate, really about rose water. So her suspicions had been unfounded. But the debts were real. $70,000 were real. And a husband who was hiding all of it was real too. What was she supposed to do with that knowledge? Confront him? Demand explanations? Or stay silent, pretend she knew nothing, and wait for him to come clean? She chose the third option. Not because she was a coward, well, not only because of that, but because she wanted to see how far he would go with his lies. Would he ever tell her himself? Or would he hide it to the very end? It was a kind of test. A test of honesty. Of trust. Of whether they even had a marriage or just the appearance of one. A month passed. Then another. Life went on: work, home, rare meetups with friends, trips to parents. Emily kept watching. Brian still stayed late sometimes, still spent a lot of time on his phone. A couple of times she noticed him talking in a low voice after stepping into another room. Once she caught him off guard. He quickly closed some window on his laptop when she walked in. Work, he said. She nodded, but didn't believe him. In April, something strange happened. Emily came home earlier than usual. Appointments were canceled, and she decided not to stay late. Brian wasn't home yet. She took off her jacket, walked into the kitchen, and froze. A stack of papers was lying on the table. Emily stepped closer. It was an insurance policy. In her name. Life insurance in case of death. The payout amount, $250,000. Beneficiary, Brian Welch. Emily stared at the papers, and the world around her seemed to slow down. Insurance. On her life. $250,000. She had never taken out this policy. Never signed these documents. And yet there they were, lying on the table, with her signature at the bottom of every page. The signature looked like hers, but it wasn't. A forgery. Her hands were shaking as she flipped through the pages. The policy date, 3 months earlier. January. Right after that dinner. After the message about the dose. After everything. She heard the front door open and quickly put the papers back exactly the way they had been. Brian walked into the kitchen. Oh, you're home early. Didn't expect you. Appointments were canceled, she said. Her voice sounded calm. She surprised herself. Nice. Want dinner? Sure. They ate dinner, talked about nothing important. Emily smiled, nodded, answered questions. And inside there was ice cold, solid, like stone. Now she knew for sure. Not suspicions. Not guesses. Not paranoia. Facts. Her husband had forged her signature. Taken out a life insurance policy on her. $250,000. Enough to cover all his debts and still have money left. He needed her dead. That night, when he fell asleep, she took his phone. Her fingers trembled as she tried combinations, dates, numbers, names. On the 7th attempt, she got it. 1988, his birth year. So obvious, and she hadn't thought of it right away. She opened the messages. That same K was still there. She scrolled up. Far up. All the way to the beginning. And froze. K wasn't Kate. K was Kyle. Some Kyle. The contact saved as a single letter, no last name. The conversation had started about a year earlier. At first, discussions of financial schemes, terms Emily didn't understand. Then something about a project and a way out. And then she read and couldn't believe her eyes. Option 1, a loan. But they won't approve it, credit history's shot. Option 2, sell the apartment. But it's mortgaged, good luck with that. Option 3, insurance. That was Kyle. Brian replied, what insurance? On your wife. You take out a policy, wait it out, then an accident. Clean. Emily almost dropped the phone. She kept reading. They discussed details. How to take out the policy without raising suspicion. How to forge the signature. How to make everything clean. The word clean came up several times. And that message add the dose before serving. Don't mix it up. It was about poison. It had been about poison all along. Below that, Brian asked whether Kyle had gotten what he'd promised. Kyle replied, yes. I'll hand it over tomorrow. Emily closed the phone and put it back. She didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't shake. Inside there was emptiness, huge, cold, ringing. Her husband was planning to kill her. Poison her. For money. For $250,000 to pay off his debts. To save his own skin. She got out of bed and went to the bathroom. Turned on the light. Looked at herself in the mirror. The same Emily. Gray eyes. Dark hair. Pale face. Alive. For now. She had to do something. Go to the police? With what? Screenshots that proved nothing by themselves? Run away? Where? To her mom in Scranton. He'd find her. And if she ran, he'd know she knew. He'd become dangerous. No. She needed another plan. One where she would be safe and he would get what he deserved. Emily stared at her reflection and, for the first time in a long while, felt not fear but anger. Quiet. Cold. Calculated. In the morning, she acted as usual. Made breakfast. Kissed her husband on the cheek. Went to work. There, straight to the computer. She searched for information. Articles about exposed poisoners. Forums discussing toxicology. Ways to detect poison in food. And most importantly, ways to prove intent. The police wouldn't act without evidence. She needed facts. Records. Witnesses. At lunch, she called Sarah and told her everything. Her friend was silent for a long time, very unlike her. Then she said quietly, Em, you have to leave. Right now. Pack your things and go. Where? To me. To your mom. A hotel. Anywhere just far away from him. He'll find me. And besides, I don't have proof for the police. He'll say it was a joke. Or a prank. Or that I'm losing my mind. Then, Sarah hesitated, then get proof. But carefully. Very carefully. If he realizes you know she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Emily began collecting evidence. She took screenshots of the messages at night while Brian slept, emailed them to a separate account she'd created just for this. She found a copy of the insurance policy where he'd hidden it and photographed it. She recorded conversations, bought a tiny voice recorder, the size of a flash drive, kept it in her pocket. Brian sometimes called Kyle. Emily caught fragments. Everything's on track. Next week. Yes, she doesn't suspect anything. For 2 weeks, she lived in hell. She smiled at her husband, cooked for him, slept in the same bed, knowing he planned to kill her. Any day could be the last. Any dinner could be poisoned. She stopped eating what he cooked, using excuses, not hungry, ate at work, on a diet. He didn't insist. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment. Maybe he hadn't gotten the poison yet. Maybe he was just being careful. By the end of April, she decided the evidence was enough. Screenshots, photos, recordings, everything was copied in multiple places. A flash drive with Sarah. Cloud storage under a fake name. A safe deposit box she'd rented specifically for this. Now she had to act. She called Uncle Howard and asked to meet. He agreed, probably surprised, but he didn't show it. On Saturday, she lied to Brian again, said she was visiting a friend, and drove to Long Island. Uncle Howard met her at the door. He looked older than last time, or maybe it just seemed that way. "Come in," he said. "Tea?" "Yes, please." They sat on the same porch as before. Uncle Howard listened in silence as she told him everything from that first message to the latest recordings. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he asked, "Do you have the evidence with you?" "Copies, yes. The originals are in a safe place." He nodded. "Smart girl. Thomas would be proud of you." Emily didn't understand what her late father-in-law had to do with this, but she stayed silent. "Here's the thing," Uncle Howard said. "It's too early to go to the police. They don't like cases like this, too much paperwork, no glory. They'll drag it out, shut it down, say it's a family dispute. We need a different approach." "How?" "Give him a chance to make a mistake. Catch him in the act." The plan was simple and dangerous at the same time. Emily would have to provoke Brian, push him into acting. Create a situation where he would try to poison her but fail. And get caught. Uncle Howard knew people, former military, former cops. They would help. "But it's dangerous," he warned. "If anything goes wrong." "I understand," Emily said. And she really did. But she didn't see another way. When she got home, she started preparing. First, she created an illusion. She told Brian they had finally been approved for a loan. A lie. That they could refinance the mortgage under better terms. Another lie. That their financial situation would improve soon. Complete nonsense. She watched his reaction. He looked surprised, pleased, or pretended to be. Asked for details. She answered vaguely, too early to talk about it, but everything would be fine soon. The idea was to let him think her death could wait. As long as there was hope for money another way, he wouldn't take risks. That bought her time. Then she dug deeper. Kyle. Who was he? Where had he come from in Brian's life? She searched his phone, social media, mutual contacts. Eventually she found him, Kyle Dempsey, a former college classmate of Brian's. Now supposedly a businessman, or maybe a con artist, judging by the photos, expensive watches, cars, restaurants. The kind of guy who loved to show off. According to the messages, he was the one who suggested the insurance scheme to Brian. And he was the one who promised to get the poison. Emily found his Facebook page and scrolled through his photos. His face was unpleasant, smug, small eyes, thin lips. A classic schemer. In early May, she took the next step. She messaged Kyle from a fake account, posing as a woman interested in financial consulting. The exchange was short. He quickly realized she wasn't going to pay and stopped replying. But Emily learned enough. He really was involved in shady schemes. And he had connections, not the kind you'd want. Meanwhile, Uncle Howard wasn't sitting idle. Through his contacts, he found out that Kyle had been charged with fraud several times but got away with fines. That he'd had conflicts with business partners, one of which ended with someone in the hospital. That he used drugs, not hard ones, but enough to have legal trouble. This man is dangerous, Uncle Howard said. Not just for you, for anyone who deals with him. Brian was stupid to get involved with him. Emily agreed. But Brian's stupidity was his problem. Her problem was surviving and getting justice. By the end of May, the plan started to take shape. Uncle Howard found a man, a former detective who now worked as a private investigator. His name was Victor. He was short, gray-haired, with eyes that looked like they'd seen everything and were no longer surprised by anything. "So your husband wants to poison you," he said calmly, as if they were talking about the weather. "Got it. What do you have?" Emily showed him everything: screenshots, recordings, photos. Victor studied them carefully for a long time. Then he nodded. "Not bad. But not enough for court. Messages are his word against yours. Recordings too. We need an actual attempt." "You mean he really has to try to poison me?" "Exactly. But don't worry. We'll control everything." The plan was this: Emily would arrange a romantic dinner, supposedly for some special date, it didn't matter which. Invite Brian, create the right atmosphere. He would most likely take the opportunity if he already had the poison. Victor and his people would be watching. The dinner would be recorded. The food would be tested before and after for foreign substances. If he added anything, that would be the proof. And if he doesn't add anything? Emily asked. Then we wait for the next time. Sooner or later, they always try. Emily agreed. There wasn't much of a choice. The date was set for mid-June, supposedly the anniversary of their first meeting. In reality, it was in August, but Brian probably wouldn't remember exactly. She started preparing. Bought groceries, a nice tablecloth, candles. Played the role of a wife who wanted to please her husband. Brian was surprised, but seemed happy. What's the occasion? He asked. Just because. We haven't spent time together in a while. He smiled. The same smile that once made her heart race. Now it only made her shiver. The day before the scheduled date, Victor came to inspect the apartment. He installed cameras small, discreet in several places, the kitchen, the living room, the hallway. If anything goes wrong, press this button. He handed her a key fob that looked like a car remote. We'll be in a car outside. We'll respond within 30 seconds. 30 seconds is a long time, Emily said. Long enough not to die. The main thing, don't eat anything he cooks or touches. Nothing. The evening came. Emily set the table, lit the candles, turned on soft music. She put on a beautiful dress, the same one she'd worn at their wedding. Brian came home from work, saw everything, and froze in the doorway. What's this? A surprise, she smiled. You like surprises. He looked at her strangely, and for a second she thought he understood everything. But then he smiled back. I do. Dinner went almost normally. They talked about work, plans, nothing important. Emily watched his every move. He poured wine, one glass for himself, one for her. She waited until he took a sip before lifting her own glass. He served the food first, her plate, then his. She noticed his hands hovered over her plate a second longer than necessary. Invisible to anyone else, but she was watching for exactly that. Enjoy, he said. You too. She didn't touch the food. Picked at it with her fork, but didn't put anything in her mouth. Brian ate with appetite, or pretended to. You're not eating, he noticed after a few minutes. My stomach's acting up, she said. Been nauseous all day. Must have eaten something at work. Should I call a doctor? No, it'll pass. You eat, don't worry about me. He shrugged and kept eating. After dinner, which Emily never touched, they sat on the couch watching a movie. Brian had his arm around her shoulders, as usual. She felt his warmth, his smell, his presence, and thought about the fact that this man wanted to kill her. Maybe still did. Maybe the poison was already in that wine, in that food. Maybe if she'd taken just one bite. She shuddered. Cold? He asked. A little. He covered her with a blanket. Later, when he fell asleep, Emily got up and went into the kitchen. She packed up the leftovers, both his and hers. Victor would pick them up in the morning and take them for testing. The results would be ready in a day. They came 2 days later. Victor called early in the morning. We've got something, he said. We need to meet. They met at the same cafe where Emily had talked to Kate. Thallium was found in your portion, Victor said. A small amount. Not lethal in one dose, but with regular use, you know. Emily nodded. Thallium. The very poison she'd read about. Tasteless, odorless. Builds up in the body. Kills slowly, hair loss, abdominal pain, then organ failure. Looks like an illness. Almost impossible to detect without special tests. Is that proof? She asked. That's half the proof. Now we need to connect the poison to him. Find the source. Then the case is airtight. The source was found faster than expected. Victor looked into Kyle Dempsey. It turned out he'd once worked in a chemical lab. Access to reagents. Thallium wasn't common, but not impossible for someone with connections. A few more days, and Victor had a statement from a former co-worker of Kyle's who'd seen him take something out of the lab. That's enough, the former detective said. We can go to the police. Emily did. She filed a report long, detailed, with all the evidence attached. The investigator, a young guy with tired eyes, looked skeptical at first. But when he saw the lab results, he straightened up. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked. "I am." "He's your husband." "Ex-husband." As of today. She had already filed for divorce that morning. The arrest was quick and ugly. Brian was taken at home that evening when he came back from work. Emily wasn't there. She was staying with Sarah. She found out over the phone from Victor. They took both of them. Him and that Kyle. Hang in there. She didn't cry. Didn't feel joy. Only emptiness and relief. The trial took place in the fall. Brian denied everything, claimed it was a setup, that his wife had framed him, that he knew nothing about the poison. Kyle blamed it all on Brian. The lawyers tore into each other like dogs. But the evidence was overwhelming. Messages. Recordings. Lab results. Witness testimony. The verdict, 8 years for Brian for attempted murder and fraud. 6 years for Kyle as an accomplice. Emily sat in the courtroom and looked at the man she had once married. He'd aged over those months, his hair thinner, wrinkles deeper. Or maybe she just hadn't noticed before. When they led him away, he turned and looked at her. There was no remorse in his eyes. No anger. Only emptiness. Like a mirror. After the trial, Uncle Howard invited her to his place. They sat on the porch, drank tea with his honey, watched the autumn garden. Leaves were falling yellow, red, orange. Beautiful. "You did well," Uncle Howard said. "You're strong. Like your mother." "You knew my mom?" "A little. Saw her a couple of times when Thomas was still alive. I liked her. Straightforward. Honest. You take after her." Emily sold the apartment in Wayne. She had to pay off the mortgage early, but there was something left. She moved closer to her mom, to Scranton. Found a job at the local hospital as a nurse, like before. Life was starting over. A year passed. Then another. The wounds healed slowly, but they healed. Emily stopped flinching at every phone call, every knock on the door. She stopped checking her food for poison, though at first she did it automatically. She learned to trust again, not everyone, but some people. Sarah visited, bringing funny stories about her endless suitors. Her mom was nearby, grumbling as always, but kindly. Life went on. One spring day, Emily was walking through the park and suddenly noticed a man sitting on a bench. He was reading a book. Remark, 3 Comrades. He caught her look and smiled. "You like Remark?" he asked. "I do," she said. And for some reason she thought maybe this is the beginning of something new. She sat down beside him. He introduced himself, Daniel. A history professor at the local university. Divorced. No kids. Loved books, movies, and long walks. They talked for 2 hours about literature, about life, about how strangely fate sometimes unfolds. When he asked for her phone number, she gave it to him. They started seeing each other. Slowly. Carefully. Like two people who had already been burned and were afraid of getting burned again. Daniel didn't ask about her past. Apparently he sensed she wasn't ready to talk about it. She was grateful for that. Maybe one day she'd tell him. Or maybe not. It didn't matter. A year later, they got married. The wedding was quiet, only the closest people. Her mom. Sarah. A couple of Daniel's friends. No karaoke. No drunk relatives. Just two people who decided to be together. "Are you happy?" her mom asked after the ceremony. Emily thought about it. Happy, such a strange word. She wasn't sure she fully understood what it meant. But she was calm. She felt safe. She believed the future could be good. "Yes, Mom," she said. "I think I am." A year later, a daughter was born. They named her Alice, after Daniel's grandmother. A tiny, wrinkled, screaming miracle that turned their entire life upside down. Emily held her in her arms and thought, this is what it was all for. This is what was worth enduring everything for. What was worth fighting for and not giving up. Daniel stood nearby, looking at both of them, and there was something in his eyes that made her want to cry. Not from sadness, but from fullness. From the feeling that life can be generous sometimes, despite everything. A letter from Brian arrived when Alice was 3. He wrote from prison, apologized, said he had realized everything and wanted to start over when he got out. Emily read the letter, folded it back into the envelope, and put it in a desk drawer. She didn't throw it away, but she didn't reply either. The past stayed in the past. She was no longer the woman who sat in the kitchen staring at the message, add the dose before serving. She was different now. Stronger. Wiser. Freer. That evening, she and Daniel were sitting on the terrace of their small house, the one they had bought a year earlier on the outskirts of Scranton, with a garden and a swing set for Alice. They were drinking tea and watching the sunset. Daniel held her hand warmly, securely. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Emily was quiet for a moment. "About how strange life can be. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be here, with you, with Alice, I wouldn't have believed it. And now? Now I do." He smiled and pulled her closer. Outside, some bird was singing, maybe a nightingale, or maybe just a sparrow that imagined itself one. It didn't matter. It sounded beautiful. It sounded like life going on, no matter what. Alice ran out onto the terrace, small, with messy hair, wearing dinosaur pajamas. "Mom, Dad, I don't want to sleep. Tell me a story." Emily laughed and scooped her daughter into her arms. "What kind of story do you want?" "About a princess." "What kind of princess?" "One who saved herself." Emily exchanged a look with Daniel. He was smiling. "Okay," she said. "I'll tell you about a princess who saved herself." She carried her daughter to the nursery, and the words kept spinning in her head, a princess who saved herself. It was a good story. Maybe the best one of all. And it was her own. But that happy evening on the terrace was still far away back then. And the road to it turned out to be much longer and harder than anyone could imagine. Let's go back to the moment when Emily was just beginning to understand what was happening. To the time when she was still living under the same roof with Brian, knowing his terrifying secret but not yet having enough proof. Those were the hardest weeks of her life, and they deserved to be told in more detail. After the night she read the messages with Kyle, Emily barely slept. She lay in the dark, listening to her husband's breathing beside her, thinking how could the man she had lived with for 5 years plan her murder? How could that Brian, who brought her coffee in bed on Sundays, who stroked her hair when she was sick, who cried at their wedding, how could he? She searched for answers and found none. Maybe he had always been like this and she just hadn't seen it. Or maybe he had changed under the pressure of circumstances, debts, fear. People change, she knew that from her job. She had seen illness break personalities, seen fear of death turn kind people cruel, and sometimes cruel people kind. But it was one thing to see it in others, and something completely different to live through it yourself. At work, she held it together. She smiled at patients, followed orders, filled out charts. Nora, the chief physician, asked several times if everything was okay. Emily said yes, she was just tired. Co-workers whispered behind her back. She noticed the looks but ignored them. Let them think whatever they wanted. The main thing was to hold on. Not to crack. Not to give herself away too soon. One evening, near the end of a shift, Virginia approached her a senior orderly who had worked at the clinic seemingly since its founding. Small, thin, with sharp eyes and a deeply lined face. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, "I can see you're in trouble. I don't know what kind, and I don't want to know. But remember, everything passes. This will pass too. Just hold on." Emily almost burst into tears right there in the hallway, amid the smell of disinfectant and medicine. "Thank you, Virginia." The old woman patted her hand and shuffled away down the linoleum corridor. Those small acts of humanity helped. They reminded her that the world wasn't made only of betrayal and lies. Home was the hardest part. Every evening felt like walking through a minefield. Emily learned to control every movement, every word, every glance. She played the role of a happy wife, unsuspecting, slightly distracted. It was exhausting. Sometimes, locking herself in the bathroom, she allowed herself a few minutes of weakness just sitting on the edge of the tub, breathing deeply and slowly, the way she'd been taught in yoga classes she once attended. Then she washed her face, looked in the mirror, ordered herself to hold on, and went back out into her fake life. Brian seemed to notice nothing. Or pretended not to. He still came home from work, ate dinner, watched TV, went to bed. Still hugged her sometimes, kissed the top of her head, said, "I love you." Those words made Emily shudder inside, but she smiled back. "I love you too." Lie on top of lie. Fake on top of fake. How had they come to this? She thought a lot about her marriage, especially at night when she couldn't sleep. She tried to understand whether there had been signs earlier, something she'd missed, something she hadn't paid attention to. And gradually, she began to remember. Little things that had seemed insignificant back then. How Brian sometimes lied for no reason about trivial things. Said he'd stayed late at work when he'd actually been at a bar with coworkers. Said he hadn't received her message, even though she'd seen it marked as read. Small, everyday lies, the kind many people are guilty of. She hadn't attached any importance to it. Everyone lies a little sometimes, right? But now she understood it was a pattern. He lied easily, naturally, without guilt. For him, lying was a tool, convenient, familiar. And if he could lie about small things, why not about big ones? She also remembered an incident from their second year of marriage. They'd argued over something trivial, she couldn't even remember what. Emily cried, and Brian looked at her with an expression that was cold, detached, almost curious. Like an entomologist studying a butterfly under glass. It lasted only a second, then he caught himself, hugged her, began to comfort her. But she remembered that look. Back then, she'd blamed it on fatigue, on stress. Now she understood that was the real Brian. The one he hid behind the mask of a caring husband. Alongside these memories, Emily continued collecting evidence. Every night, when Brian fell asleep, she took his phone and photographed the messages, piece by piece, so as not to miss anything important. She learned a lot. It turned out the idea of poisoning hadn't come immediately. At first, Kyle suggested other options, staging a robbery, causing a car accident. Brian rejected them as too risky, too many variables. Poison seemed more reliable to him. Slowly, unnoticeably, he wrote, "Doctors won't figure it out. They'll think it's some kind of illness." Emily read this and felt everything inside her clench with horror and disgust. Her husband was discussing her murder as calmly as he might discuss buying a car. There were other discoveries. It turned out Brian hadn't gotten into debt only because of cryptocurrency. He had lost part of the money in online casinos and sports betting. Gambling. Another addiction she hadn't known about. He hid it skillfully, never played at home, left no obvious traces. Emily found it by accident, scrolling through his browser history, betting sites, gambling forums, articles like How to Win Back Your Losses. A classic portrait of a gambling addict. Now a lot made sense. The debts. The desperation. The willingness to do anything. He had cornered himself and decided the only way out was through her death. One evening, Brian came home drunk. Not heavily, but noticeably. He sat at the kitchen table, poured himself more whiskey, stared at one spot. Emily cautiously asked what was wrong. He was silent for a long time, then said, "You know, Em, life, it's a strange thing. You think everything's under control, and then boom, you're in a hole. And you don't know how to get out." She froze. It sounded like a confession or the beginning of one. "What hole, Brian?" she asked. He looked at her, and for a second something flickered in his eyes, something alive, human. Maybe regret. Maybe fear. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Forget it. I'm drunk, talking nonsense." And he went into the bedroom. Emily stayed in the kitchen. Her hands were shaking. She thought maybe it's not too late. Maybe if she talks to him, explains, finds another way out. But she stopped herself immediately. No. He had already crossed the line. He had bought poison. He was planning to kill her. No conversation would change that. The only thing she could do was protect herself. Her connection with Sarah during those days was a lifeline. They talked on the phone every evening. Emily went outside, sat on a bench in the courtyard, and told her friend everything she'd learned that day. Sarah listened, gasped, gave advice sometimes sensible, sometimes crazy. Maybe you should poison him first? Self-defense, she suggested once. Emily couldn't help laughing. Sarah, that's not an option. I know. I'm just so angry, you know? Men are jerks. All of them. Not all, Emily objected and surprised herself by believing it, despite everything that was happening. Meeting Victor, the private investigator, was a turning point. He was a professional, you could tell immediately. Calm, methodical, without unnecessary emotion. Emily, he said at their first meeting, I understand how hard this is for you right now. But we need to act coldly. Emotions are the enemy in cases like this. She nodded. I understand. Good. Then let's begin. He explained the strategy. Brian is a classic cowardly criminal. He won't resort to open violence because he's afraid. Poison is his way of distancing himself from the murder, making it clean, impersonal. That means we need to create a situation where he feels safe enough to act. You need to become the perfect victim, Victor said. Trusting. Unsuspecting. Give him confidence, and he'll make a mistake. It was hard intentionally playing weak when everything inside was screaming with rage. But Emily managed. Preparing for that romantic dinner took 2 weeks. Victor and his team, 2 silent men, he simply called the guys, checked the apartment for bugs. There were none. They installed their own cameras and tested the connection. Emily was to wear a tiny microphone, a minuscule device like a mole, attached to the skin behind her ear. We'll hear every word, Victor explained. If anything goes wrong, we react instantly. And if he notices, he won't. This is professional equipment. On the day of the dinner, Emily was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Her hands shook as she set the table. Her heart pounded so hard she thought he would hear it. But when Brian walked in, she pulled herself together. Smiled. Played her role. And it worked. He suspected nothing. He felt safe and he made a mistake. After that evening, when the lab confirmed the presence of thallium in the food, everything moved quickly. Victor contacted an investigator he trusted, an older man named Rogers from the Major Crimes Unit. Rogers studied the materials and whistled. Well, I'll be damned. Haven't seen something like this in a while. Usually husbands just beat or strangle their wives. This one ran a whole operation. He asked Emily many questions, thorough, sometimes uncomfortable. She answered honestly, hiding nothing. At the end, Rogers said, You were lucky, Emily. If you'd eaten that food, you might not be sitting here in a few months. She knew that. But hearing it from a professional felt like a punch to the gut. Emily didn't see Brian's arrest. She had asked specifically not to be home. She didn't want to look him in the eyes at that moment. Didn't want to see his fear, his anger, his attempts to justify himself. Later she was told that at first he denied everything, then started crying, then demanded a lawyer. A classic. Kyle was arrested the same day. He turned out to be even more pathetic. He immediately started selling out his accomplice, bargaining for a lighter sentence. A rat, Victor called him. The perfect word. The period between the arrest and the trial dragged on painfully, almost 6 months. Emily moved in with Sarah, then with her mom in Scranton. She couldn't stay in New Jersey, where everything reminded her of the past. She locked up the apartment in Wayne and tried not to think about it. Later she sold it through a realtor without even coming to the showings. The money went toward paying off the mortgage and the lawyer. Yes, she needed one too, to represent her as the victim. When her mother learned the whole story, she didn't believe it at first. It can't be, she kept saying. Brian? Him? Then she cried. Then she hugged Emily and didn't let go for a long time. My girl, forgive me. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. Mom, it's not your fault. But her mother blamed herself for letting her daughter marry a man like that. Emily comforted her as best she could, even though she herself needed comfort. The trial was an ordeal. 3 days of hearings. Testimony from witnesses, experts, the defendants themselves. Brian's lawyer tried to paint it all as a misunderstanding, claiming his client never intended to kill his wife, just wanted to scare her, or didn't even know there was poison in the food. Emily listened to the nonsense, clenching her fists under the table. Her lawyer, a young woman named Ellen, turned out to be sharp and relentless. She dismantled Brian's defense brick by brick, presented the messages, recordings, expert testimony. The jury listened closely. Some shook their heads, others looked at Brian with disgust. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was deathly silent. 8 years in federal prison. Emily heard the words and felt nothing. No joy. No relief. No triumph. Only emptiness. Justice had been served, but it didn't give back the lost years, didn't heal the wounds, didn't erase the memories. After the trial, she took a long time to recover. She saw a therapist, a woman named Teresa, who specialized in victims of domestic abuse. Yes, it was domestic abuse. Teresa explained that in their very first session. You don't have to be hit to be harmed. Lies, manipulation, attempts on your life, all of that is abuse. Emily had never thought of herself as a victim. The word felt humiliating. But gradually she accepted it. Acknowledged that yes, she had been hurt. That she had a right to pain, to anger, to time to heal. Sessions with Teresa helped. Emily learned to trust again, first herself, her feelings and intuition. Then other people. It was hard. After Brian's betrayal, it felt like anyone could turn out to be a monster behind a mask. But Teresa patiently worked through that fear with her, breaking it down, showing its irrational parts. Not everyone is Brian, she said. Most people are normal, kind, capable of love. One bad person doesn't define everyone else. Working at the Scranton Hospital became an anchor for Emily. The familiar routine shots, IVs, bandaging was calming. Patients distracted her from her own problems. She especially bonded with Mrs. Johnson, an 80-year-old woman hospitalized with chronic bronchitis. Mrs. Johnson was one of those people who had lived a hard life without turning bitter. The Great Depression, the loss of her husband and 2 children, she'd lived through it all and remained a warm person. Sweetheart, she told Emily, life is like a river. It carries you along, sometimes over rapids, sometimes into whirlpools. The main thing is not to drown. Stay afloat. And then, before you know it, it carries you into calm water. Emily listened and thought maybe Mrs. Johnson was right. Maybe her calm water was still ahead. Emily met Daniel when she had almost stopped thinking about her personal life. 2 years had passed since the trial. She was living alone in a small rented apartment not far from her mom's house. She worked, read, took walks in the park on weekends. Sometimes she met up with former classmates who had stayed in Scranton. Life was quiet, predictable, safe. And yes, a little lonely. She remembered that day in the park in every detail. A warm, sunny May day. Apple trees in bloom, white and pink clouds on the branches. She was walking down the path slowly, enjoying the weather, when she saw him sitting on a bench with a book in his hands. Something made her stop. Maybe the way he was completely absorbed in reading. Maybe something about his face, calm and open. She stepped closer and saw the cover. Remark. And she remembered everything: the first meeting with Brian on the train, the same author, the same book. The irony of it all. Daniel looked up and smiled. Not a smirk, not an evaluating glance, just a smile, like at an old acquaintance. You like Remark? He asked. I do, she said. And she sat down next to him. They talked for 2 hours about books, about life, about all kinds of things. He turned out to be a history professor at a university. Divorced, his wife had left him for someone else 5 years earlier. No kids. He lived alone in an apartment he'd inherited from his parents. He loved his job, his students, old maps, and Earl Grey tea. An ordinary man with an ordinary life. But to Emily, he seemed anything but ordinary. There was something about him, a quiet strength, an inner confidence without any bravado. He didn't try to impress her, didn't brag, didn't show off. He was just himself. When he asked for her number, she hesitated. Just for a second, but she hesitated. Teresa's voice, her therapist's, echoed in her head, not everyone is Brian. She gave him her number. Their first date was at a cafe, the same one that smelled of cinnamon, where she had once met Kate. They drank coffee and talked easily, without tension. Daniel told her about his work, about students who sometimes mixed up George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. Emily laughed for the first time in a long while, truly and freely. He didn't ask about her past. He must have sensed she wasn't ready. It was the right thing to do. Tactful. The second date was a walk along the river. The third was a movie, a comedy whose title she didn't even remember. The fourth was dinner at his place. He cooked himself pasta with tomato sauce. Simple, but good. Emily ate and thought, this is how it's supposed to be. Simple. Calm. No hidden meanings. No quiet threats. She told him the truth on their fifth date. They were sitting on a bench in the same park where they'd met, watching the sunset. Emily talked for a long time, stumbling over words, stopping now and then to get her emotions under control. About Brian. About the debts. About the poison. About the trial. Everything. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he took her hand. Just took it, without saying anything. They sat like that for several minutes, in silence. Then he said, "Thank you for telling me. That explains a lot." "What exactly?" she asked. "Why you sometimes flinch when I come up behind you? Why you check the locks 3 times? Why?" He didn't finish, but she understood. He had noticed. All this time, he had noticed and hadn't pushed, giving her space. "Aren't you scared?" she asked. "After everything I told you." He looked at her directly, openly. "I'm scared for you. Not for myself." Their relationship developed slowly, and that was exactly right. Emily didn't rush, and Daniel didn't push. They met, talked, got to know each other. Gradually, she began to trust him, not blindly, like she once trusted Brian, but consciously, with her eyes open. She saw his flaws, a bit pedantic, a habit of correcting people, a dislike for surprises. But those flaws were small, human, not dangerous. He met her mom 6 months after their first meeting. Her mom was cautious after the story with Brian. She looked at all men with suspicion. But Daniel managed to win her over with his calm politeness, genuine interest, and willingness to help. After dinner, when he left, her mom said, "He's different." "I can see it." Emily nodded. She could see it too. He proposed a year later simply, without any drama. They were walking through that same park when he suddenly stopped, took her hands, and said, "Emily, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" There was no ring at that moment. He later admitted he'd left it at home out of nerves. She laughed and said yes. Just yes. The wedding was quiet, just as they wanted. City Hall, then lunch at a small restaurant on the edge of town. Her mom cried with happiness. Sarah came from New Jersey and cried too, but they were good tears. Daniel's friends, a few colleagues from the university, gave toasts kind and slightly formal, just as historians tend to be. Emily looked around and thought, this is it. This is the calm water Mrs. Johnson talked about. The first year of marriage wasn't easy, not because they fought, but because Emily was still battling the ghosts of her past. Sometimes she had nightmares: Brian, poison, suffocation. She woke up drenched in sweat, and Daniel held her, whispering, "I'm here. You're safe." He never complained. Never showed irritation. He was just there patiently, reliably. She kept seeing Teresa, less often now, once a month, but she kept going. She worked on herself, on her fears, on trust. It was work, hard, necessary work. And little by little, it got easier. The nightmares came less often. The anxiety receded. For the first time in a very long while, she began to feel normal. When she found out she was pregnant, her first feeling was fear. Not joy fear. She was afraid she wouldn't cope. That she'd be a bad mother. That her past would somehow affect the child. Daniel listened to all her fears and said, "We'll handle it. Together." And she believed him. The pregnancy went smoothly, no morning sickness, no complications. Emily worked until the 7th month, then went on maternity leave. She and Daniel prepared the nursery, painted the walls a soft yellow, put together the crib, argued over names. He wanted to name the baby after his grandmother Alice. She agreed. A beautiful name. Old-fashioned and gentle. The labor was quick, just 6 hours. Daniel was there, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her forehead. When the doctor placed the tiny, screaming creature on her chest, Emily cried. From happiness. From relief. From everything at once. "Hi, Alice," she whispered. "I'm your mom." The first months with a baby were chaotic: no sleep, endless feedings, diapers, colic. But Emily was happy, even in the hardest moments. She looked at her daughter and thought, this is what it was all for. This is why she fought and survived. Daniel turned out to be a wonderful father, patient, attentive, ready to get up in the middle of the night to rock a crying baby. He read parenting books, watched videos about child development, called the pediatrician over every sneeze. Sometimes Emily teased him about his anxiety, but deep down she appreciated it. He cared. Truly. Alice grew quickly from a wrinkled, screaming bundle into a chubby baby, then a curious crawler, then a little person with her own personality. She had Daniel's eyes, brown, warm, and Emily's smile. She loved animal books, drawing, and mac and cheese. She hated broccoli and going to bed on time. A normal child. A wonderful child. The letter from Brian came when Alice was 3. Emily saw the envelope in the mailbox and immediately knew who it was from. The handwriting was familiar, angular, with that distinctive leftward slant. She stood in the hallway holding the envelope, unable to decide whether to open it or throw it away. She opened it. The letter was long, 4 pages of tightly written text. He wrote about repentance, about realizing his mistakes, about wanting to change. He apologized for everything. Promised that when he got out, he would start over. That he wouldn't bother her, wouldn't seek a meeting. He just wanted her to know that he was sorry. Emily read the letter twice. Then folded it back into the envelope and put it in a desk drawer. She didn't throw it away, she couldn't bring herself to. But she didn't reply either. What could she write? I forgive you. She wasn't sure she did. I don't forgive you. That would have been a lie. She no longer felt hatred toward him. He had become simply no one to her. A person from the past who no longer had any power over her. Daniel noticed that she was quiet that evening. He asked what was wrong. She showed him the letter. He read it silently, then set it down. What do you feel? He asked. Nothing, she said. And it was true. Nothing. The past stayed in the past. She was a different person now, stronger, wiser, freer. She had a family she loved. A home where she felt safe. A daughter worth living for. A job that brought satisfaction. Friends she trusted. A life she had built herself from the wreckage of an old one that had been betrayed and destroyed. That evening, she and Daniel sat on the terrace, drinking tea, watching the sunset. Somewhere outside, a bird was singing. Alice ran out in her dinosaur pajamas. Mom, Dad, tell me a story. Emily picked her up. What kind of story do you want? About a princess who saved herself. Emily smiled. It was a good story. Maybe the best one of all. She carried her daughter to the nursery, tucked her into bed, straightened the blanket. Alice looked at her with big, sleepy eyes. Mom, was the princess happy afterward? Yes, sweetheart. She was. Forever? Emily stroked her daughter's hair. Forever is a very long time. But for a very, very long time. Alice smiled and closed her eyes. A minute later, she was already asleep peacefully, the way only children can sleep. Emily stood by the crib, looking at her daughter. Outside, the sunset was fading, painting the room in soft pink tones. Somewhere downstairs, Daniel was clattering dishes as he cleaned up. An ordinary evening. An ordinary life. The very life she had dreamed of and almost lost. She left the nursery, quietly closing the door, went down to the kitchen, and hugged her husband from behind. He turned and kissed her on the forehead. What are you thinking about? About how lucky I am. No, he said seriously. I'm the lucky one. She laughed and held him tighter. Outside, night was falling warm, summer, full of stars. Somewhere far away, thousands of miles from here, Behind the walls of a prison, the man who had once been her husband was looking at the same sky. Did he think about her? Did he regret what he had done? Emily didn't know. And honestly, she didn't care. She had found her home, her family, her life. And that was all that mattered.